Welcome back to Performance Process, everybody. I'm Kaylee Fretz, joined as always by Ronan McLaughlin. Ronan, what is your CDA today?
Today, I don't know, feels quite high today.
You're like a 0.28?
Nah, on a good day.
0.35?
0.35 on a normal day.
Well, we're not talking CDA today. We're not talking aerodynamics really at all. We're talking optimization, sleep and wearables and all sorts of other things. Ronan, you had an interesting conversation with Frank Overton, who is the man behind Fascat Coaching. Also, weirdly, my old neighbor in my neighborhood in Boulder.
He said hi.
Run into him riding all the time. He did say hi. Oh, thanks. But he's got a new product. He's been coaching for a very long time. I think that a lot of folks out there might know him as a real proponent of sweet spot training. That's kind of one of the big things that his kind of coaching group has always pushed and believes is a really great option, particularly for folks, you know, like you and me, that are a little more time crunched and maybe don't have time for the big volume stuff. Anyway, that's kind of one of the things he's really well known for, but he's got something else coming down the pike right now that actually just was a means of spurring a broader conversation for us about wearables and the way that we use them and the fact that, frankly, there are way too many of them at this point. So what exactly did you guys talk about?
We talked almost entirely about his new Optimize app, which obviously going to get into it in the conversation here, but it's a way of pulling in the sleep data from various wearables that are on the market and sort of collating them with your on-bike stress data from like your power meter or your heart rate monitor or GPS data, and then using that to sort of give you a traffic light system, so red, yellow or green, in terms of how ready you are for training on any given day. The sort of wearable discussions is a huge topic, and something we're going to delve into in greater detail, but I think this conversation is a great starting point. We get into sort of, you know, the value in different metrics, which metrics can actually do really matter and which you don't need to pay all that much attention to, sort of how you can sort of figure out which ones are worth paying attention to and which are not, which are accurate and which may be less accurate. But, you know, a lot of the conversation that follows is a conversation about his new app, Optimize. The podcast sort of happened off the back of a meeting that we had planned for me to get to know the Optimize app. We were about 2 minutes into that meeting when I thought, this is a pretty fascinating conversation. I'm going to hit record on this. So with Frank's blessing, we hit record. We sort of rewind those 2 minutes. And what you're about to hear is, effectively what was about to ensue anyway.
Well, let's get to it.
Let's jump in.
The episode you're about to hear is actually for members only. So we've got about a third of it, half of it, something like that, in this free channel. But if you want to get the whole thing, you have to head over to escapecollective.com/join. Once you do that, you'll get an email with instructions on how to get the members only podcast feed into your podcast app of choice. It's really easy. It's like one button click, takes like 90 seconds, and you don't have to do it again. You just do it once and it's in your phone forever, unless you cancel your membership, which we can see, and then we take it away. But just to warn you all, this is going to cut off.
Do it now, so you don't get cut off halfway through.
Yeah, exactly. Just go over and
listen,
take care of this before we get started. Uninterrupted.
Frank Overton, FasCat Coaching. Welcome to the Performance Process podcast. Thank you for joining us today. Nice to have you on the show because I've been listening to your podcast for a few years now. One of the things I always meant to ask was, what does FTFP mean?
FTFP is short for follow the fucking plan. What it really is, fundamentally, it's about developing good training habits, not just for professional athletes, but for amateur athletes alike. And so we help athletes develop good training habits. And when they do, what we've noticed over the years is they can follow the plan much better. Therefore, they can improve much more. And then they'll be much more likely to be happy and reach their goals.
It's one of those that you form the habit and it becomes easier to maintain it.
That's right.
And when you make training a habit, you know, plans are much easier to follow.
A lot of athletes report that having a training plan or having a coach helps hold them accountable. They know when they wake up each day, this is what I got to do to reach my goals. And the athletes that can FTFP have much greater success than maybe the athletes that haven't developed good habits yet. And so we try to help them develop good habits along the way, all sorts of things like doing your workout in the morning, or, eating right, just committing to carving out an hour a day. That's what we mean by good habits.
Yeah, the listeners to your podcast will be aware of your winning in the kitchen phrase, and you've got a few others also that they're basically quick fire ways of just reminding us all while getting on the bike and doing new peak powers is nice. It's actually the smaller aspects of training that make a bigger difference.
Yeah, you got to cry in the dojo if you want to laugh on the battlefield.
So crying in what's the dojo? The dungeon or the basement or what?
Dojo is like, martial arts, karate and they go into the dojo to train and the hard work. It's an old Eastern Asia expression.
Karate was not one of the things that I was good at as a kid when I tried it. So thankfully not being good at that led me to trying cycling at some point. So that wasn't all bad. We're here today to talk about your Optimize app. Before we do that, can you give us just like a sort of 10,000 foot view, very, very brief sort of insight into your own background? You've been coaching for 2 decades at this point?
That's right. Yeah. For the past 20 years, I've coached Tour de France pros to amateur Janes and Joes. Got started back in 2003. Yeah. I discovered I was a much better coach than I was an athlete. I found that the most effective way to coach athletes is to help them with their data. That was back when power meters were coming around, and I was an early adopter of an SRM, early adopter of power-based training methodologies, and at the time, and it still is, in my opinion, power-based training is the single greatest way to coach an athlete. So, yeah, we've been doing that for like 20 years, and data there's so much knowledge in data that we can use to help athletes. And it's our job to take it in, understand what it means, and distill that back to the athlete to fundamentally tell athletes what to do, let them know if they're improving, and, let them know what to keep doing to keep improving, to leverage the sports science.
So Optimize then, what I understand is it's like sort of, bringing all the data you can get from different wearables and sensors and that these days, and sort of collating it into one place and giving athletes an easy to understand metric to determine what they should do on a given day. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Bob from New Jersey, who just bought a bike and he wants to train with power and he's got a wearable. He doesn't want to have to get a master's degree in sports science to understand his data. He just wants to know what to do. And he wants to unlock the sports science that comes with the data. And so what we do is we combine riders' ride data, power, heart rate, GPS, with their wearable data to give them a simple red, green, yellow actionable insight of what to do each day. And so what Optimize does is it balances the athlete's training and recovery. So you go out and you train, that's your stress, and then you sleep, and that's your recovery. But it doesn't always balance that way. Sometimes a training plan assumes you take a recovery day and you're good to go the next day. And we're really good for a long time, of measuring stress from athletes, power, heart rate. And what we haven't been good at that's possible now with Optimize is measuring the amount of recovery an athlete gets. And so, for instance, an athlete can go out and do a hard weekend, Saturday, Sunday, and we ask them to recover on Monday, and then they wake up on Tuesday and the training plan can say, you're good to go. But their recovery data may say, oh, hold on now. You're not all the way recovered, so today needs to be an easy day, but tomorrow can be your hard day. And the origin, or the way that this started, and the reason why we combine power data with wearable data, is when Whoop came out 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we started getting texts in the morning as coaches from athletes. Coach, I'm in the red today. What do I do? And we would get in this flurry of texts, and we would say, well, how do you feel? And they'd be like, well, fine. And then we would look at the training plan and we'd be like, man, this looks doable. And then we look at the power data and we say, okay, we'll just ignore your wearable and keep following the plan. And we knew that using heart rate as a measure of quantifying stress was not the way it works for endurance sports. With cycling, we have the ability to quantify work, duration times intensity, and training stress, which is much more superior than heart rate. So we use a metric we call OTS, optimized training stress, duration times intensity, to get a value of how much work, how much stress the athlete did from their training. And then we use raw sleep data, raw HRB data, juxtapose that against their training stress. And so every morning athletes wake up and they get an easy to understand data visualization. Are you recovered? Are you not yet recovered? You know, in cases when athletes aren't consistent, they get the yellow indication like, hey, you need to train more consistently.
You mentioned OTS there. Is that like TSS, or is it how does it differ?
It's improved upon TSS for a couple of reasons. So we use a different way of calculating the stress. So number one, we use an exponentially weighted moving average of the power output compared to normalized power, which raises the peaks by an exponent of 4, which oftentimes overestimates a rider's stress. So we use exponentially weighted. We have also a new metric. It's called X power. We compared that. In the X power, it takes into account all the peaks and the valleys, but it's also what you can do in a steady state effort. So a lot of times what we've noticed over the past 15 years is there was these things called MP busters, normalized power busters, and the athlete would crack out like an incredible normalized power, and there's no way in heck they can do it steady state like in a time trial. That was causing a lot of overestimation. So we just kind of calmed that down mathematically in our software. But also, when you go up a canyon or when you're soft pedaling, you're not getting any training. You're not doing anything for your body. And so we don't count zero pedaling time towards the measurement of stress, unlike TSS. So those are the two primary improvements that we did.
Back in the original SRM days, I remember you used to be able to, I don't know if you can still do it, but you used to be able to set the SRM power control that it would only record time when you had power on the pedals or power in the cranks. So suddenly your 5-hour spins became like 3-hour spins.
Yeah, I mean, when you do a group ride that's involves a lot of coasting or drafting, I mean, you're supposed to sit in, but when you're measuring training stress, it should be lower from a group ride or descending. So it's just like one of those nerd subtlety differences in how we utilize power data.
And X power, what was that, sorry?
X power is a new way of measuring what you can do steady state from your dynamic stochastic power output. So you go do a group ride and you throw down for, let's say, 20 minutes. You're not it's not steady. You're all over the place. Sometimes you're doing zone 6 and other times you're doing zone 3. So X power just measures exponentially with an exponentially weighted moving average what you could do if you were to go out and do a steady state effort, like a climb or a time trial. We use that, to calculate peak 20-minute or 60-minute power output.
You mentioned also just normalized power busters. What type of athlete or what type of physiology would you have normally seen that sort of, and what type of rider?
The normalized power busters really come from athletes that are anaerobically gifted. The ones that they're good at the short-term power output, the sprints, the 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute. And so generally it's crit racers, cyclocrossers, even mountain bikers are really good at the anaerobic work. Even, road racers that are really good, but even climbers can have really good anaerobic power output. And so like I coach Phil Gaiman, and that guy is money anaerobically. Phil.
Hence the KOMs.
Yes, he's so good at what we call supra threshold, but that's because he's deriving a lot of his power output from his anaerobic energy systems, beyond 20 minutes. And that's his Achilles heel is and he'll be the first to admit it, going from 20 minutes to like a 40 or 60 minute climb. Works out well when you're KOMing Everesting because you're choosing like an 8-minute hill, but that's another story. So when you're anaerobically gifted, and you give it in a race and a group ride, you're going to overestimate your normalized power. For amateur athletes, plenty of amateur athletes can be anaerobically gifted. It's hard to estimate their what they can do from their threshold from that data.
Sort of starting with what myself and what listeners will probably best understand in terms of power and heart rate and that. Well, specifically power, considering everything you've just said about the different types of athletes and different way of producing power and that, what is the optimized app doing, and is it accounting for the different physiology that riders might have, and when it's sort of taking in OTS and X power and sort of trying to determine how much strain or stress that interval or that session had caused the day before, and how that relates to how ready you are for the following day?
It's a combination of using X power and also OTS. And so X power doesn't overestimate. Therefore, your OTS is more representative of the stress you had the day before. So the values tend to be a little bit lower than TSS's. And then we compare those to sleep and HRV. And the way that we use wearable data. So everyone knows you can have a poor night of sleep and still have a great race or a great workout. And everyone knows.
Or you can get up at 2 a.m. to do an event that starts at 4 and you can still perform that day. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or you can have, a couple of beers in your HRV tanks, but you're going to race just fine. It's kind of like carbo loading. The way that we use wearable data is really, it's based on your baselines and your 7-day trends, your 1-month trends. And so a lot of the wearable manufacturers, they'll penalize you for a poor night's sleep or a bad HRV. And it's psychologically, it kind of messes with riders. And they wake up on an important race day and they've done everything they possibly can by the book, and they get this red score, like messes with their head. And that's no good. That's like what we call a false positive. We don't do that. So, most athletes sleep poorly the night before the race. They're nervous, or they've been traveling, or they have to get up really early. So
I used to always tell myself and tell riders I would have been coaching that it's not the night before that matters. It's the night before that matters, and how much sleep you get then. And I would have only told them that either the night before an event or the morning of an event. So when the night before, they didn't know that was the night that mattered. And getting very confusing, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's the night before, but it's also the 7 days before and the 7 months before. And then how's your sleep and your HRV been for that time frame? And so that's how we kind of arrive at the visualization score. And so if you're in the red, what we're going to tell athletes is, hey, maybe you need to back it off and recover more than you thought. And so it really helps athletes, coaches, and sports scientists make actionable, informed decisions based on what they've done. It's like with pro athletes, they just want to train. And so if they're in the red, we're going to say, hey, you still need to recover. Or if you're intentionally overloading, it's like, okay, great, but hopefully there's some recovery on the horizon after this block. And so we always like riders to go in the red, which is, it's actually necessary. And we want to see them come back up into the green. That's, training 101, you tear and you repair. But if you are just like red for extended periods of times, that's when overreaching goes over into the overtraining category. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
And so is it it's basically like an API, you're pulling wearable data from the wearable providers, and then that's automatically loaded into your Optimize app? Is that how it works?
Yeah, we have integrations with Whoop and Aura, Apple Watch, all the Garmin devices that measure sleep and HRV. And what we pull in is the raw data. We don't mess with like sleep stages or readiness scores. It's total sleep and HRV. And we use that within our algorithms, just really balance that with their power data, how much training stress they were incurred the day before, but also, how much they were incurred the week before. So it's not, it also takes into account their training load. If you have a low training load, you can come off the couch and, you can bust out a big ride, and you'll be tired for one day, but you'll bounce back. But like when you're really really, training hard and carrying a high training load, your window, your margin of error becomes much slimmer. And you have to really, really be careful when you carry those high training loads. Then, we'll tell athletes they need to back off and stuff like that.
So total sleep and HRV, that's what you're pulling in. There's like, I've worn a Whoop for a couple of years, and there's a heck of a lot of other data in there also, like resting heart rate, average heart rate. Yeah, I'm forgetting them off the top of my head, but it's really only HRV, total sleep you're looking at. Right. All the other data, you're not even looking at that.
That's right. Resting heart rate is a good one. We're trying to simplify things for athletes, and so we're trying to reduce the noise. And the more data you take in, the more noise there is. And so we believe that HRV is a better proxy of recovery than resting heart rate. Resting heart rate is good. HRV is better. And so therefore, when we were designing out the technology, it was like, okay, let's utilize HRV over resting heart rate.
We've all sort of known HRV has been about for a while, but often you might find that it will differ from device to device or manufacturer to manufacturer. How do you account for those differences? You can't really say one is right or wrong. They're just a different number. If you go to Whoop or a Garmin, Apple Watch, whatever it might be, how is optimizing accounting for those variances?
Hopefully the athlete is using one device, and then the numbers become comparative between the device. And so we wore Whoop and Aura and Apple Watch like every day for like 6 months and compared the numbers. They're never the same. But if you look at it over time, they come out to be pretty close. So all these wearables are fairly good at measuring HRV. There's just individual variances. But yeah, you wouldn't want to mix your Apple Watch data for a couple of days with like your Whoop data for the next couple of days. That's going to introduce noise. And you know what they say? It's like, bad data in, bad, insight back out. Garbage in, garbage out.
I'm more thinking maybe sticking with one device, but all the users on the app, they'll not all have the same device. If I'm 94 HRV on my Whoop, and that's what I would consider well rested for myself, that same condition, had I been using a Garmin, I might feel the same and expect the same and all those things with a score of 120.
Right.
How does that impact what Optimize is telling? It's just based on that individual's history, and so the actual number is kind of irrelevant. It's how it relates to everything that came before it. Is that right?
Yeah, it's related to the athlete's like trends. And, so they're going to mathematically establish those trends over 7, 14, 21 days as their data comes in. And so then the numbers are calculated off of their baseline and their trend. So, whether it's 120 and your trend is 100, or if it's 80 and your trend is like, 60, it's relative to your data coming in. It's kind of like how we individualize training zones relative to one's like threshold. And so that's why we use baselines and trends. It kind of normalizes the data independent of the numerical values.
Okay, folks, Ronan here, interrupting the podcast just to say, sorry, that's all there is for this free version of this week's Performance Process podcast. If you want to hear the rest of it, you've already heard at the start of this podcast that you need to head over to escapecollective.com/join, sign up and do the one-time thingamajigger where you get the podcast sent to your feed from now on as a member, and you'll never have to hear me interrupt you again.